Hello, welcome again to another episode of Talk Architecture, and I'm your host Naziaty Muhammad Yaacob. Today there is a new topic in which I got inspired to provide a discussion on this topic because I was doing my research on Kevin Martlow's interviews on various YouTube videos and also the ones that I interviewed him as well. And he mentioned in this video at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok about going back to first principles. Now, as someone who's been in architecture for a long time, I remember that, yes, at one time we were practicing first principles, and I need to have a good freshen up on those principles. And so I researched on that. So the concept of first principles in architecture can be understood in two main ways. Of course, we remember the most fundamental, timeless truths about what makes good architecture. For example, the Vitruvian foundation, Vitruvius, that was established about 2,000 plus years ago. So that's the most fundamental. And then you have the first principles thinking, which as a problem-solving method, breaking architecture down to basic physical human truths and reasoning from there without leaning on tradition or analogy. So let me talk about the classic first principles, the Vitruvian triad. So we know that Marcus Vitruvius Polio, the Roman architect, engineer, defined three essential qualities any good building must have. So these remain the most widely accepted first principles in architecture adopted by most architects and engineers. Number one is firmitas, which means strength, firmness, durability or structural integrity. The building must stand up safely, resist forces, and intended for a lifespan that lasts without excessive maintenance. The second is utilitas, or utility, or commodity, or functionality. I talk a lot about functionality in my work, and this is the angle that I always use to determine how we are designing for the human. So in Vitruvius Utilitas, the building must work well for its purpose. Efficient layout, appropriate spaces, good circulation as well, accessibility, appropriate environmental performance like light, air, acoustics, temperature, and it supports the human activities it was built for. So this also relates closely to the type of building and what that type of building needs to be. So thirdly is venustas, which is to do with beauty, delight, aesthetic quality. So here, according to Vitruvius, the building should please the senses, evoke emotion, create meaning, provide harmony and proportion, and contribute positively to human experience and the cultural and environmental context. Almost every architecture school would still teach this triad. So it translates to modern speak using the word firmness, commodity, and delight. So this was with reference to 17th or 18th century English writers interpreting Vitruvius. So everything else, proportion, rhythm, balance, sustainability, is usually considered derived or supportive of these three. So that's the first example of the first principles. Now, the second is first principles thinking applied to architecture in the modern era, and what we know of it now. So this is about stripping away assumptions, styles. That's how we always do it, thinking. You go back to the basics. So sometimes we design based on regulations, then rebuilding from all this things that we learn or believe from our tutors. So what we need to ask are some fundamental questions and truths that architect might start from when we think about first principles. What is, number one, what is the actual human need this building serves? Not the program. I mean, the program could be given by the client. Okay, you got to do this and you have to have this space and this space, but you need still to answer the question. A deeper need. What actual human need this building serves? So that was the first question that you ask. And number two, what are the laws of physics that cannot be violated? So we see the site of it, whether gravity, thermodynamics, material strength, light behavior, sound propagation, that create the thing that we're creating at the moment, the building that we're creating. What can we do? Obvious thing is that if it's a building in the desert, we can't do is to make it much more hot. This, or in a tropical country, such as in Malaysia, if we have a lot of glass, we're gonna get a lot of heat inside, and the cost for cooling it will be too tremendous. So we need it. Every action has a reaction. So what we create could be something that is being violating the laws of physics. So the third question is, what are the biological, psychological constants of humans? So what is that design? What will it need to do in terms of the need for shelter, safety, prospect, and refuge? The circadian light, how we would still be connected to our circadian cycle. Do we let in the daylight, and how much? So thermal comfort is one thing, between 18 to 26 degrees Celsius. Acoustic privacy, social connection versus solitude. So, in designing, so we are also constantly thinking about what a human psychological need for certain types of design. For example, an elderly home or home for older persons. There need to be places for interaction or social connection, for example, more than anything else, because this helps with, shall we say, preventing dementia from getting worse, or depression. But obviously, it's not as straightforward as that. I would admit. I'm just giving an example. Throwing it there that we, when we intended the space to be for a certain need, like a school, it needs to be also psychologically well designed for the students to be able to flourish, where they would be spending time in school for how many hours a day, right? So also, we need to understand the biological constants, like the design of spaces that, the sitting, standing, doing work, the toileting area, and stuff like that. So another question we could ask, what is the lowest energy way to achieve the goal? We try to not expedite or not expend too much energy when we decide on decisions about the materials and construction, and how we orientate the building so that it can take into account thermal comfort and, anything that could help the building to be like a breathable building, rather than all airtight and air conditioned. It's kind of like there's a lot of problems as well for some people in being in air conditioned tight building for hours, where you don't have a choice to go and naturally ventilate it, because for some people they have problems to do with sinuses or rhinitis. So another question is, what is the cheapest true material cost if we ignore current supply chains and labor habits? So we try to work on behalf of the client to get a building up which suits what the programmatic needs, but at the same time we remember the first question we asked about the deeper need. So in this question, the cheapest true material cost, we are trying to be, the word practical comes to mind, but I think even more so than that is sensible, I think, in terms of how we want the experience that we want to create, but yet it helps to give some sort of sensory design, which even the cheapest true material could be used. You know what I mean? So it's not, sometimes people talk about the wow factor in terms of the finishes, but that is not something which is sustainable in a way. So there's another question. What question is this? That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Question number 6 that we need to ask. What are the real site constraints with regard to the sun, path, wind, water, soil, views, noise, ecology, and not just zoning code? I see this as something that we always ask the students to do, the site constraints, the site contacts, but we don't really ask those other questions, remember, that we asked earlier. And we need to actually introduce this very early on for students of architecture to grapple with, but of course introduce it slowly in a way that there are design problems in which they need to master from time to time. And finally, what is the minimum viable enclosure that satisfies firmitas and utilitas? Yeah, when it comes to it being functional and it being built well, minimum viable enclosure, meaning do we need to open it up? Do we need to close it always? Or what is it that we want to satisfy this principle? So from these basic creative leaps become possible. Instead of let's make it look like a brutalist or stylistic design, like, what do you have out there? Mid-century modern, parametric. So we ask, what does physics and human comfort literally require here, rather than stylistic notions? So we have here a quick comparison of the levels of first principles. So the levels of first principles, we look at Vitruvian bedrock, that's foundational. And then we look at gestalt or formal composition. And then we look at modern performance. And the fourth is radical first principles. So when you think about Vitruvian bedrock, there are those three irreducible qualities of firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. Firmness, commodity, and delight. Then after that, the next level would be in Gestalt formal composition, how humans perceive order and beauty. And then the third, modern performance, measurable human and planetary outcomes. And radical first principles is physics, biology, and minimal assumption. In practice, most strong architects constantly move between these layers, starting with Vitruvian triad as a non-negotiable checklist, and applying human-centered and performance requirement, which is something that is demanded more in terms of ESG, environmental sustainable goals. There's also the social goals, so meaning human-centered, and we could go even deeper than that. So the third one is occasionally do full first principles resets when the brief site budget or climate forces radical rethinking. So you out there, if you're an architecture practitioner or a student of architecture, it's good to actually go back to first principles so that you always, I call it massaging. I call it, it says resetting, right? Because you look at the brief again, and then look at the site again, look at the budget and climate forces, and start asking those questions, how the building could become what it needs to be. So I'm going to discuss in the next part how Kevin McLeod designed using the first principles. And this is based on some research, and also, research, not my research, but research out there, like a literature review. And also I give some take on this, partly from what Kevin McLeod has mentioned before when I was with him at the architecture design studio, teaching students of architecture, and also from the videos of the various talks that he had done. So that will be the second part. Thank you very much for listening to the first part.